I'm Marcia McMurray. We are here today in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Today is August 12, 2010, and we are here as part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. I have the pleasure and privilege of interviewing my father, Robert L. McMurray, who recently retired from the practice of law in Cleveland, Tennessee. Tell us your name and date of birth, please.
Robert L. McMurray, June 26, 1929.
And where were you born?
Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. But at that time, my parents lived in Mercersburg, but Mercersburg didn't have a hospital.
And who were your parents?
My father was Arthur Alexander McMurray, and my mother was
Frances?
Frances Willard Osborne, yes.
Okay. And what occupations did your parents have?
My father was a veterinarian. He graduated from Ohio State University. My mother was a teacher off and on for years, and she graduated from the University of Illinois. And my parents met at the University of Illinois. I'm not sure whether my father graduated from there or whether he just went on and was able to get a veterinary degree.
What did your mother teach?
Well, the main thing that I remember teaching was when I was in Columbia, Tennessee. She taught at the junior high school, but I wasn't sure of the exact course. I had an interesting thing happen, though. One time at Athens, the regular English teacher, I believe it was sick or something, and she came in and taught. And there I was, do I call you mother or do I call you teacher? Do I call you Miss McMurray? It was kind of an embarrassing thing for me.
What did she tell you to do?
I don't remember.
I thought I remembered she taught English, but I wasn't sure if that was right.
That's right.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about your siblings.
Well, I have one sitting right in front of me, Marcia.
No, your siblings.
Oh, my siblings.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. My oldest one of us was Virginia McMurray Balmer, and she has had quite an interesting career in medical things. She was when the war broke out, World War II. She was at Ohio University in nursing school, and then she shifted over to a hospital in another town in Ohio. And as a result of her various going on, she has, I don't know how many degrees, but she's been to, I think, at least 6 colleges, and she has a PhD in a field, master's in the field, and nursing, RN field, so she's kind of the brain of the family.
Okay. And besides your sister, another sibling?
Yes, my brother, Keith Spencer McMurray, who unfortunately died in 1989 at age 62. But he was a geologist. I think he got his undergraduate degree at the University of Kansas and his master's degree at the University of Kansas in geology.
All right. Tell us a little bit about where you lived growing up.
I'm just going to name the states instead of all the cities.
Okay.
Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee. I said Missouri, didn't I?
Yes.
And let's see, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, Missouri, Arkansas, and Tennessee, 6 places.
So your family moved around a lot.
That's correct.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that your father was a veterinarian. Did you acquire a love of animals since he was a vet?
Not really, because he didn't deal with small animals. He was primarily cattle were his forte, and but we did have dogs. And by the way,
yes.
Since I had a wife and 4 daughters, I always insisted that our dog be a male dog.
That's right. Okay, you mentioned that you moved around a lot, but where did you go to high school?
Columbia, Tennessee, for 1 full year, and then another half year. Then the family moved to Athens, Tennessee, so I finished up the half year there, and 1 year at McMinn County High School.
Okay, and then did you go back to Columbia after that?
That's right, and finished up in Columbia, Tennessee.
All right, so you graduated from high school in Columbia.
Correct.
All right, and where did you go to college?
The University of Missouri.
How did you decide to go there?
Well, I had a cousin who had just been discharged from the Navy. He was in Arkansas, but he was going to the University of Missouri. That was one factor. My dad had bought what the family called a rock farm out right below Branson, Missouri, and so that I could get in as a state student. Let's see, there was one other. Oh yeah, in high school, in college, I was a drummer in the band, and the band director from the University of Missouri came through Columbia, and I had an interview with him and tried out for him to see whether I'd be able to make the Missouri band, and he assured me that I would. So that was all several factors that kind of led there.
Okay. And what type of drum did you play?
Snare drum.
All right. Before you went away to college, during the summers of your teenage years, did you have any jobs or do anything interesting at that time?
Yes. I worked for Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company, which is a outfit out of Cleveland, Ohio, and they had ore boats. And my family, I had two cousins that had sailed on the ore boats with the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company. And they got my brother on, and then through them, I was able to get on with Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company.
And where were the boats? Where did you sail?
We sailed anywhere from Buffalo, New York, up to Superior, Wisconsin, down to Chicago, Illinois, down to Illinois.
So on several of the Great Lakes then?
Yes. We didn't sail on Ontario, and I think that was about the only one we didn't sail on.
Okay. What was that experience like?
Well, I experienced my first time of seasickness because I'd come up off a shift as a coal passer, and I was lying in the bed, and the ship had some waves, and the porthole would go up like that, and then it would go down like that. And then I kept looking at it. Next thing I knew, I was seasick.
Do you have any recollection about how much you earned while you were working on the Great Lakes?
I believe it was at least $200 a month, and that got room and board on top of that.
Okay. And how did that compare to your salary from your first law job?
Well, my first law job was a magnificent $200 a month.
But no room and board?
But no room and board.
Okay.
But interestingly enough, at that time in Nashville, young graduates coming out sometimes had a hard time finding a job, and how their compensation was, whatever business they brought in, they would get a percentage of that.
These were law school graduates.
These were law school graduates, and I had you, and I had Kathy, and Ginger came along, and I couldn't afford to have that kind of compensation.
And for everybody's information, Kathy and Ginger are two of my sisters, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Let's go back to your days in college. What did you study at the University of Missouri?
Well, when I first went there, I didn't really know what I wanted to study, so I studied some general courses for about 2 years. And then I kind of drifted into business school. While I was in business school, I took a course in business law, and that was when a light bulb turned on. I felt that was something that I really wanted to go into. And I was able to well, I'd had a full semester, a year in business school, and I was able to take 9 hours of law, 9 hours of business school, and 21 hours of law to finally get a graduation. And interestingly, the university was very good because they treated all my law courses as being okay for my business school degree, which is a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration.
Okay, and to jump ahead a little bit, where did you go to law school?
Of course, there was the University of Missouri when I took the 21 hours. The other law school was, when I graduated from university, I had a family and I needed to go to work. And sometime earlier than that, General Electric had sent out some information to the business school looking for trainees on a business training course. And I applied for that business training course. And we would know whether we passed, whether we got a white envelope or a blue envelope. And fortunately, I got a blue envelope. And so we took that, and where I was stationed was up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And you were there in the car while we were driving up, and I think you cried most of the way. It was
Okay, well, how did you go from being in Pittsfield, Massachusetts to continuing your legal studies?
Well, I'd done reasonably well in their business training course, but I just really wanted to get back to law. And I knew that Albany, New York, which is about 40 miles from Pittsfield, had a law school at night, and I'd discussed that with Maury.
That's your wife?
That's right. But we had not done anything about it. But then later on, she and you went down to Memphis, Tennessee to attend her sister's wedding. And my father came through Memphis, and he wanted to meet with your sister and see you. And she told him about how much I wanted to go to law school. And he indicated that he would see that that would be okay. And I chose Vanderbilt because the division counsel at Pittsfield had a previous person go down and be the dean at Vanderbilt Law School. And he told him what a good law school it was. And I knew I wanted to practice in Tennessee. So that's how I got down to Vanderbilt.
All right. And did Vanderbilt give you any credit for your studies at Missouri?
Yes, they gave me full credit at the same grade level that I had at Missouri.
Okay, so that sounds like it turned out really well to start the law school classes at Missouri.
It was.
Okay, but let's go back to the University of Missouri. You mentioned your wife, my mother, is Maury.
Yeah.
And her maiden name was Leftwich, right?
Leftwich, correct.
All right, and she was from where?
Memphis, Tennessee.
All right, and so I believe you met her while you were at the University of Missouri.
On a blind date.
On a blind date, and what was she doing in Missouri?
She was attending Stevens College.
All right, and so you all met, and I know the family history, but I believe you had a very short courtship, didn't you?
That is correct.
Okay, how long after you met were you married?
Oh, about 2.5 months, something like that.
A short period of time, right?
I was a good persuader.
Well, and how long have you been married now?
60 plus years, continuous.
Continuous, that's good. Okay, so then you went to Vanderbilt.
Right.
And what did you particularly like studying at Vanderbilt?
I became more interested in the property, estates, and trusts law. That was what kind of attracted me.
All right. Do you remember any of your professors while you were there?
Yeah, Edmund Morgan, who was a retired Harvard professor. A fellow by the name of Ferguson, he was a retired professor at some other school, but he taught a course. By the way, going back to Eddie Morgan, I did fairly well in his class the first year. Partially through the class the second year, another class from him, he called me into his office and he said, "McMurray, you're not doing as well as you did last year," which scared the fool out of me. And I buckled down and I came out all right.
If I remember correctly, was Professor Hartman at Vanderbilt when you were there?
What was his nickname?
Dutch.
Dutch, yes.
Okay. Well, the interesting thing was 30-something years later, he was one of my professors, too. I don't know if you remember that or not.
No, I don't remember it. I couldn't remember Dutch, but he was quite a character.
Yes, he was. Let's see. At Vanderbilt, were you involved in any activities there?
The last year I was on staff of the Law Review.
Okay. And while you were at Vanderbilt, did your family increase?
Yes.
And that was my sister Kathy, I believe.
Kathy, that's right.
Okay. Now, I remember before I went to law school, and you may have told me before then, but you had a rule about studying for exams.
I did.
Actually, you had a rule for how you studied all along in law school. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as far as the exam, I always made it a rule never to study anything the day before the exam. And that made my wife very happy, so we could go to a movie, and because otherwise I was off studying.
Okay. And do you remember what your process was for studying during the semester for your courses?
Well, all I remember was there at a long, long period of time in the library, and I kept you had your notes, and I would review those notes pretty well before studying, before we took an exam.
Okay. So what you did was kind of keep up with things as you went along, is that right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So part of that not studying the night before the exam was to for the good of the marriage, is that right?
Well, it helped. No, but it also helped me. I just so I wasn't tied up with something right before the exam.
Okay. Now, we talked just briefly about what you earned when you went to work after law school. Tell us about where you went after you graduated from law school. Where did you went to work?
I went to work with Shelton & Shelton in Columbia, Tennessee. They were looking for somebody, and I was looking for a job, and I went down there and talked with them. And of course, I'd graduated from high school in Columbia, Tennessee, so I thought that would be a good fit.
All right. When you were at Vanderbilt, did they have a placement office at that time to assist with finding jobs?
Yes, I had to have gotten it through them.
Okay. So what did you do when you were at Shelton & Shelton?
First place, I'd never been in a law office before.
Okay, so let me digress. So you didn't have anybody in the family or any close friends who were lawyers, is that right?
No, not at all. And I went down there, and they gave me an upstairs office and gave me a dictating machine. And I never knew how to use a dictating machine, so I would write things out, and then I would dictate on it. And that was one way of getting my work done.
Do you remember what type of work you did, what type of practice?
Yes, a fair amount of it was doing title work, which I'd be first to admit that I wasn't the best at. It was not really my forte. Did a very little bit of trial work, but not much. And it was just general things.
Okay, and while you were in Columbia, did your family continue to grow?
Yeah, number 3 came along.
And that is?
Ginger.
Okay.
And when I called my wife's family, I have to give you a little background. Her father had been a great athlete, and of course he had 2 granddaughters coming along. So I called him. I said, his name is Virginia.
Okay. Let's see. So you were in Columbia for how long?
A year.
And where did you go from there?
I went to Chattanooga, Tennessee, at the Noon and Noon firm.
Okay. And what type of practice did you have at Noon and Noon?
A lot of it was doing work for insurance companies.
Insurance defense type work?
Insurance defense, and also sometimes working out the costs on repairing vehicles, things like that. Okay. I did a little bit of work on wills and trusts, but not as much as I wanted to do. Okay.
Do you remember any particular cases or anything about the firm when you were there?
No, I really don't.
Okay. So how long were you at Noon and Noon?
The first time was 4 years.
And what happened at the end of that 4 years?
Well, I don't think I mentioned before, when I graduated from Vanderbilt, I had they had sent something down to the law school looking for people for a teaching fellowship.
Who had sent something?
NYU.
Okay.
NYU. And I applied for that, and they awarded it to me. Discussed it with Maury, and she reminded me I had a family and I needed to work more than I needed to continue to go to school for a while. So that's what I agreed with her. She was absolutely right. That's what I should have done. But when I was at Noon, I got to wondering if I could have the fellowship again? And they said yes. And so we were in a little bit better financial situation, not much, but better, so we thought possibly I could make it all right. And so they awarded it to me, and I went up to NYU. The fellowship was supposed to cover room and board, and that was fine. And then I got up there and talking about the board, I thought that was going to be on a 7-day week, and it turned to be on a 5-day week. And so I almost turned around and came back home. But that's where I learned to eat Italian food, because I figured I'd eat a big Italian dinner, and it would carry me through primarily on Sunday.
Okay. When you were in New York, what was life like there?
Well, there was it was mostly school, a little bit of recreation, but not very much.
Okay. And so did you finish that fellowship, or what happened?
No, I did not finish the fellowship. I came home, and finances were much, much worse than Maury had. She had not let me know about these things. And I'd gone down to visit with the old firm, and between the time I had gone to NYU and the time I came back, Mr. Noon Sr. had died. And we got to talking, and they indicated that if I would come back, they would give me a Christmas bonus that I otherwise would have had, but if I didn't come back, I wouldn't get the bonus. Well, finances dictated that I had to come back.
Okay. And speaking about the money and all, let's go back to when you were at Shelton & Shelton. Do you remember how much you were earning at when you went to work for them?
I think it was $200.
Okay. And
A month.
Thank you, a month. And what about when you came to Chattanooga to Noon and Noon? Did your salary increase at that point? Do you remember?
Yes, it did increase. I can't remember whether it was $50 or $100 a month more.
Okay. And so how long did you stay at Noon and Noon the second time?
About another 4 years.
Okay. And what happened at that particular point?
One of its previous associates there was up in Cleveland, Tennessee.
Who was that?
Jack Whitson.
Okay.
And he was calling for Ray Mosley, who was a partner in the firm, and he wasn't there. And then he and I got to talking. He said, well, do you know anybody who might like to come to Cleveland? And I said, yes. And I said, I'd like to. So I went up there and I met with Mr. Bell, who was the senior partner of the firm, Jack Whitson.
And what was Mr. Bell's full name?
Hallman Bell.
All right.
And Jack Whitson, Harlan Painter. And they had just lost a partner who had been there and left to open his own practice. And I talked with them, and they said that they would take me in, and my name would be in the firm, and I'd be a full partner, and anything that was earned after I got there, I would share equally with them. So that sounded very, very good to me. And I'll have to be frank that of the places I've been, you know, I just love Cleveland a whole lot more.
Okay. Why did you love Cleveland a whole lot more?
Well, I liked the type of practice that we had. The finances were considerably better. In fact, I was so happy about when you went off to Agnes Scott, I didn't have to borrow money or anything. I was able to pay for your tuition out of what we had saved up. And so it was, and the firm was great to work with. The other lawyers were good to work with, and so I just liked it.
Okay. Let's, can you tell everybody where Cleveland is, what county it's in, what part of the state?
Bradley County, about 45 miles up from Chattanooga.
Okay. And is Cleveland the county seat?
Yes.
All right. Let me go back a little bit so we don't forget the last sister that I have. While you were still in Chattanooga, was there another addition to your family?
Yes, Louise.
And you always did that growing up, didn't you? Marcia, Kathy, Ginger, Louise? I was first. Okay. And let's digress for a minute more, too, and tell people a little bit about your other children, what they do.
Kathy is a senior vice president at the Bank of Cleveland in human resources. She's a graduate of the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. But that degree was established considerably after she graduated from high school. And she's the secretary of the holding company for the Bank of Cleveland.
Right.
And she and the Bank of Cleveland got started by a fellow by the name of Bobby Taylor, and it was part of, I think, American National Bank out of.
Well, he had left there, hadn't he?
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. He started, and she asked him. I mean, he asked her to go with him, and she asked me what he ought to do. She ought to do, and being conservative, I said, "Oh, I think you ought to stay with him." She said, "No, I'm not going to do that."
You thought she ought to stay with American National?
Yeah, and she made a much better decision that she stayed with the people that went, and she's doing very well.
Okay. And what about Ginger? What does she do?
She graduated from the University of Tennessee in marketing, and from the time that she's graduated, she's generally been doing sales work. She has her own business now. Sometimes with some of the recession, she's been having a little bit tougher time, but things are improving.
Good. Okay. And what about Louise? What does she do?
She is her degree is from University of Tennessee in accounting, and then she has a master's degree in accounting from University of Tennessee. She worked with several firms, big name firms, you know. But now she is chief financial officer for the Community Center of Columbus, Ohio.
And that's the Jewish Community Center.
I forgot that, yeah.
Yes, okay, Columbus, Ohio. Okay. Well, what about when you went to Cleveland, going back to the practice of law, what was your practice like there?
Well, Mr. Bell furnished a number of estate planning things to me, and then I did some trial work. That was not my big thing, but it was, I didn't have to do title work. Harlan Painter handled that. And Jack Whitson did most of the trial work, but I did some of it also. Okay.
And at some point, Jack Whitson left the firm.
That is correct.
Is that when he was elected to as a General Sessions judge, or before that?
It was before that, and then subsequently he was elected to the General Sessions judge.
Okay. And you had some other people who came into the firm.
Yes, Eddie Hedrick. He's from the family that had Hedrick supermarkets up there. And
before Eddie, there was Mike Calloway.
Oh yeah, Mike Calloway first, certainly. He was a University of Virginia graduate. He came with us for a little while, and then that was a time, I think Korea might have been going on or something, and he was in the National Guard, and he got called up, but he was only gone for about 5 months or so, and then he came back to the firm, and he, of course, was one of the major trial lawyers also.
Okay. What do you particularly remember about how your practice grew and developed in Cleveland?
I think it grew primarily from word of mouth. I guess I satisfied clients with the estate planning and handling estates, things like that.
Okay. What intrigued you about wills and estates?
I don't know that I can say I know, I just know that I was intrigued about it. Of course, I'd been up to NYU, and I had studied, that was on a tax course. What I wasn't doing on the teaching, I was going to for studying income tax and estate tax and stuff like that. So that was the part that interested me.
Okay.
And I also really enjoyed working with the clients. And it was not only tax work and estates and trust, but you grew so that you would also handle many business matters for them.
Okay.
And we were very lucky. It was a very good class of clientele. We didn't handle divorces to speak of, just very rarely. We didn't do criminal work. Very, very little plaintiff's work. Jack handled that primarily. But the firm did also handle a good amount of defense work for insurance companies.
Okay. And throughout your career as an attorney, have you been involved in bar activities?
Yes,
Okay.
I was.
Tell us something about that.
Well, I got interested in some things about wills and estates and trusts, et cetera. And I wrote an article. The Tennessee legislature had passed a law about incorporating by reference a number of fiduciary powers in a trust or in a will. And I wrote a little article on that, which was published by the Tennessee Law Review, that about how incorporating things by reference and some of the things to look for. You know, it's not just a panacea for everything. And I was also lucky with the Bell firm that everybody was a member of the Tennessee Bar Association. And I got to go to a number of Bar Association meetings, and that's how things got started.
Okay. What did you do within the bar when you started going to meetings, the Tennessee Bar Association?
I don't know. Yeah, well, I did a number of seminars at meetings.
How did those seminars begin? Was there somebody who had an idea for them, or?
No, I think the first one that was done, I came up with the idea. I was interested in the wills and stuff, that we ought to have some sort of seminar on that in Nashville. Frank Bratton, who was a very good lawyer from Athens and helped me a lot on my career also, didn't think that it would really work, but it did. I think we had about 75 lawyers coming in about that will seminar. The first article was in 1964. The second article was in 1974. And it was some whys and wherefores of will drafting. And I conjured up a mythical character called Godfrey Got Rocks. And there were no rocks and all those kind of people around. And I got to wondering, you know, we have this stuff in wills and everything. Why do we have it? So I started just doing a lot of research. And I drew a mythical will, and I had a lot of research of things from state law and from tax law and stuff like that in it. And that was, I made a presentation of that document at the 1974 midwinter meetings in both Middle Tennessee, East Tennessee, and West Tennessee. And I had several fellows from, well, one lawyer from each section came by and made comments on it and about, well, what about this or what about that? And that was helpful. I don't know where Frank Bratton came in, but I don't know whether he read the articles or read that will or something, but he was a member of the American College of Trust and Estate Council. American College of Probate Council. And he wanted to know if I'd like to join, and I did. Fortunately, I was accepted. And I went to a number of their meetings and got to meet lawyers that were well-versed in everything, and that was very, very beneficial as far as I was concerned.
And well-versed in the area of estate practice?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Now, I believe you served in some leadership capacities in the Tennessee Bar Association.
Yes, at that 74 meeting, I was the 3rd district, or 3rd whatever it is, representative on the Board of Governors. And I guess maybe that's why I was able to put myself on as a speaker. And so I served on the Board of Governors, and then I ran for moving vice president, and it was a 3-way race, and fortunately I was elected as the moving vice president, and then obviously on up to president of the Tennessee Bar Association.
And what year was that you were president?
1972, excuse me, 1977, 1978.
Okay. And then you mentioned, I think that you've been involved with what was then called American Council of Probate, American College of Probate Council. All right. And
that name changed later on.
And became what?
American College of Trust and Estate Council, ACTEC.
All right. And what type of involvement did you have with ACTEC?
Well, I did present a program out in Las Vegas on drafting. And I went to most of their meetings and got to meet people from all over the country. And that was just, you know, that just opened up opportunities that it was just wonderful to be able to meet with those people.
Okay. And so that was more of a nationwide thing when you were involved with ACTEC in terms of people within that type of practice.
Yeah.
What about when you were in the Tennessee Bar Association? How did that work out in terms of meeting lawyers from other parts of the state and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, I think it was wonderful because you had a lot of good lawyers attending these meetings. There's one other thing I want to bring about. In '77 and '78, I think Shep Tate was president of the American Bar Association, and we knew him through Maury's family and everything.
And Shep Tate's from Memphis, an attorney.
Yes, excuse me. And he appointed me to a drafting committee, and that was good.
So that was an ABA drafting committee?
ABA drafting committee. I know I went to New York on one occasion on that, and meeting some of the gurus in that. I mean, that, you know, it just helps to be able to associate with those people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good.
But I also say that so a lot of very, very good attorneys in Tennessee in that field, and I think I'm going to bring up about Al Secor helped starting something.
Go ahead.
Al Secor and I know each other, and I think maybe we'd had some seminars together.
Okay. And Al is was an attorney in Chattanooga at that time?
That's right, and he got together several of us at I think it was around 1984 at towards the end of a bar meeting in Nashville, and said, well, we ought to get a probate study group, you know, so we can not only suggest legislation, but watch out for poor legislation that is sometimes presented to the legislature. And so that, and he kind of chaired all that and got us going, and it worked out the way he thought it would, and it's still an active group, as you know, being part of it. It's helped a lot.
Who were some of the other people who were either charter members of that Tennessee Probate Study Group or came on early on?
Well, I know Jack Robinson was.
From Nashville?
Nashville.
I believe there were some people from Memphis. Bob Blumenthal?
Bob Blumenthal was there. McMahon,
Jim McMahon?
Jim McMahon was on there, and Joe Walker.
All right, and then from Nashville, I'm not sure when he came on, James Gooch, I believe, was involved?
Yes, very much so.
And in Knoxville, who was involved from there? Dan Holbrook?
Oh, yeah, Dan.
Okay. What can you tell us, and let us, especially attorneys who are watching this, know about how important the social relationships are that develop out of being in a bar association?
Well, I think it's when something comes up that maybe in another part of the state, if you have this relationship, you know, somebody you can refer to. I think that's very important. Well, of course, just the social aspects are good because, you know, you talk, you gab, and you get good ideas, and you get some questions about something. It's just good to have a relationship with people throughout the state.
Okay. When you would go to these meetings, would your wife go with you?
most of the time.
Okay, and so did she develop some relationships with some of the people and their spouses?
Yes, obviously.
Okay.
One of the good benefits we had when I was moving vice president, the Bar Association was going on a trip to England, and there was a man that was supposed to go on the trip, but his daughter was having a baby and would be there while they were on the trip. So Billy Bethel called me and wanted to know if we'd like to go. Of course, we didn't have a passport or anything, and we just, in a few days, were able to get a passport through. And that was the first European trip we ever took. it was just wonderful to be able to go on that.
Okay. Take a break. I sort of lost my thought. Oh, we're doing this interview as part of the legal history project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Now, you've been in the past actively involved in the foundation itself, haven't you?
Yes.
Okay. In what capacities have you served?
Well, I remember serving as chairman.
All right. And tell us what you think the importance is of the Tennessee Bar Foundation.
Well, I think it is a great. It's a charitable organization, and it furnishes funds to these. What do we call them?
Like organizations and legal related, provide legal aid assistance?
Legal aid, yes. That's what, it's a wonderful program that exists. There's no question about it.
Okay.
And I think the Supreme Court over the years has kind of tightened it up, as far as requiring lawyers to maintain trust accounts and everything, so the money can be given. So I think the Supreme Court's done a good job on that.
Okay, very good. You also were actively involved in the Bradley County Bar Association.
Yes, I was president of that one year.
Okay, and what types of things did you try to do with the Bar Association when you were president?
I tried to bring in several legal education things.
Programs? And
Programs, that's right.
All right, and what was the reason you tried to do that?
Well, I think we can all learn from continuing legal education. Okay. And by the way, you had asked something about my relationship in the bar. I forgot to mention. Prior to going up the ladder, one year I was chairman of the Continuing Legal Education Committee.
Okay, but
so that's something that's always been interesting to me.
Okay. And you mentioned a couple of articles that you'd written and had published. Have you written some other articles?
Yes.
Okay. Were they all in the area of estates and trusts?
All of them except one, I think. One was on business matters.
Okay. You said you were involved in continuing legal education with the bar and things. What is your opinion of mandatory continuing legal education?
Well, now that I'm older, I think it's probably good. When I was earlier, I wasn't so sure about whether it was very good or not. But I think in the long run, I think there should be mandatory continuing legal education.
Okay. What changed your focus from not being so supportive as to thinking it's a good idea?
Attendance. And it's good for the people. You know, they have some very good programs on this mandatory legal education, and I don't ever remember going to some sort of a legal education thing that I didn't come home with something that I could use. Now, it was always very important as far as I was concerned.
Okay. Going back to when you were practicing law, do you have any cases in particular that you remember that you'd like to tell us about?
Yes.
Okay. I think one of particular note had to do with one of your former law partners, Eddie Hedrick.
Eddie Hedrick.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with that initially and what happened with the lawsuit.
It was, what happened was Eddie was going to try to purchase some fairly good amount of life insurance on himself. And so it was decided to set up an irrevocable life insurance trust. It was set up.
And who drafted that document?
I did, but the opinion said he did, but I did. And the issue in that was that about payment of premiums under some prior law, it would if I bought a policy and put it in an irrevocable trust and I paid the premiums, then on death that policy would be in my estate.
For tax purposes?
For death tax purposes. But the Congress had changed that law, and they made a test of whether the insured and the person setting up the trust, whether the person setting up the trust had what we call incidents of ownership, such as the right to borrow on the policy, cancel the policy, name new beneficiaries, things like that. All those things were what we call incidents of ownership. But the policy was purchased. It was Cleveland Bank and Trust Company was named as the trustee.
And did Cleveland Bank and Trust Company purchase the policy as the trustee?
As the trustee.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was kind of a critical thing that they purchased the policy. And so it went into force. Eddie, unfortunately, was killed in an automobile accident. The Internal Revenue Service insisted that that the change had not changed the previous thing. In other words, that if he had set it up and he paid the premium, that it would still be in his estate. So we went through the tax court. And the tax court said, no, that's not right. He didn't have any incidents of ownership, so it's not going to be in his estate. The Internal Revenue Service appealed that to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the tax court.
And who wrote that Sixth Circuit opinion?
Ted Milburn, who was a Chattanooga lawyer, and is my neighbor now in Alexian Village. He lives in another building down there.
And that's on Signal Mountain, Tennessee.
That's on Signal Mountain, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Did the case stop at the Sixth Circuit, or did it go up? Or
no,
what?
I don't think they went up with it. But they didn't give up. Several months or so later, I received a call from some Mississippi attorneys where they were still insisting on their position, and they wanted, my experience and everything. And I just sent them my brief and the opinion of the court, and the circuit that was in also reached the same decision as the Sixth Circuit. And then they later told me that they were able to get some money back on attorney fees and things from the IRS because they should have known, they should have stopped. They shouldn't have put them through that. I said, fine, you're going to share that with me? And they said, no.
Do you think it made a difference in the Hedrick case, which was an important case for estate tax law, that this case had involved your partner in a document that you had drafted?
Yeah, it seemed a lot of importance to me because we had his widow who would have been horribly, had paid an awful lot of taxes. I think the policy was $375,000 or something like that.
Well, did it also have any, special or a difference, I guess, in the fact that you knew a lot about the case from the beginning? Normally, you get a case after something's happened.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. I think maybe are there any other cases that you wanted to mention? I think you had a case with Cleveland Bank and Trust Company.
Yes.
Versus Olsen about inheritance taxes?
Yes. You're not going to let me look at my... Can we take a break?
This might be a good time for a break. We'll take a break. Right before we took a break, we started to talk about a case that you tried several years ago, Cleveland Bank and Trust Company versus Olsen. Can you tell us a little bit about that case?
That was a tax refund case. The estate had deducted on the Tennessee inheritance tax return interest on taxes that the estate had had to pay. In other words, it was the interest that they were deducting. And the Tennessee Department of Revenue says, no, you're not allowed to do that. That's not deductible. And so we tried it, and the circuit court judge held that it was deductible, relying a lot on some federal law. And by the way, that interest was also deducted on federal taxes too, both the Tennessee return and the federal return. And he upheld the estate's position. Then the Tennessee Department of Revenue appealed it to the Supreme Court, and they affirmed the trial court. But it was a Pyrrhic victory because the next year the Department of Revenue went to the legislature and got it changed so to specifically not describe those interest things as being deductible in on these returns.
So, and did you try the case?
Yes, I tried the case.
All right, and did you argue it before the Supreme Court?
Yes.
All right, but your client was one of the last entitled to that deduction, apparently?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Let's go back a little bit in time. All lawyers have been through the grueling experience of taking a bar exam. I don't know of anyone who'd like to take it again, although some do in different states. Tell us a little bit about your experience with the bar exam.
Well, before taking the bar exam, Bill Harbison, later Chief Justice Harbison, came to Vanderbilt and taught a class on things that might be brought up and helped us, to prepare for the return.
For the exam?
Exam. And we had not only Vanderbilt people there, but I remember there was a Columbia graduate. He was there to take the course. And so it came time to take the course, the exam, and I took it. I walked out. I said, I've knocked it. I've done wonderful. Next day, all that confidence started to fade, and it faded and faded and faded. And I wasn't as cocky as I was when I walked out. It was a while before we got the results. And so I checked in to see about mine, and they couldn't find my name on the pass list. And at that time, I had basically a job lined up with the Shelton firm if I passed the bar. And so this was this was kind of nerve-wracking. And so they said they would check on it, and so they did. And there'd been some sort of a mix-up on an address or a name, I can't remember which. But they finally found it that I had passed the bar, and needless to say, that was a great, great relief.
Yeah, there's a little bit of time in there where...
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I sweated it out.
Okay, and as you mentioned, Chief Justice Harbison taught that course, and I believe it's his son, Bill Harbison, who practices in Nashville now.
Correct.
Okay. Let's see, let's also go back. You told us a little bit about your family, your children, and what they do, and tell us a little bit about your wife and what her interests are.
She has always been very, very active in the Episcopal Church. She was one of the, up in Cleveland, she was one of the first lay readers.
And tell us what a lay reader is.
That's part of the service of the Episcopal Church, reading from the Book of Common Prayer. She also has been very active about taking communion to people that are sick or ill and can't make it. And that was both in Cleveland and continues to this, well, I guess she stopped maybe a few months ago, but she's always been very active in the church. She's very well recognized for her ability to make beautiful flower arrangements. A lot of people, when they have to have flowers, they ask her to make the arrangements, and she just does a wonderful job on that.
Okay. And while you were, beginning and continuing the practice of law, what was she doing?
Well, she was raising a family primarily, and she's the one that made you girls such good people. Independent. She's very independent, and the four of you are independent.
Sometimes to our father's chagrin, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Let me see here. Let's talk a little bit about the practice of law and some things that all of us can relate to. What about your work habits? What hours did you generally work while you were practicing?
Well, not all the time, but sometimes I'd get up. I remember I had a case in the Supreme Court on a workers' compensation thing, and I woke up and thought about something. I got up in the middle of the night, went down and wrote a brief. That's not done all the time, but I used to put a lot of hours in.
What time would you usually get to the office?
By 7 or before.
Okay.
I remember the first day I went up to Cleveland to go get with the firm, and they had a sign on the door about the name of the firm, and it would be there open at 8 o'clock. Well, I was there at 8 o'clock. Excuse me. And nobody was there. And they finally came at 8:30 and said, "Oh my gosh, we didn't know we were supposed to be here at 8 o'clock." So I don't.
Okay, and how late would you usually work, or would you work in the evenings, things like that?
I'd work there some, yeah. Just whatever needed to be done. I've heard a statement, when you go up, when you die, how many lawyers say, "Gee, I wish I'd spent more time at the office instead of with my family"? And that's when I realized maybe I spent more time at the office than with my family than I should have.
Did you kind of change that after a while, after your practice of law, as you got towards the end of your career?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the how things worked in Cleveland. When you first went to Cleveland, were the law offices generally open on Wednesdays or all day Wednesdays?
No, they were closed on Wednesday afternoon.
Okay.
Open on Saturday morning.
Okay. And
That continued. But the banks finally got together and they just opened 5 days a week straight. Nothing cut off in the middle of the week, and they were closed on Saturday and Sunday.
now that was the law offices or the banks?
The banks.
The banks. So is that why what about the law offices though? Were they?
I think they pretty much followed what the banks did.
Oh, okay. So is that the reason then the law offices were
Yeah.
closed on Wednesday afternoon?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about you and others? Was there a habit of working on weekends?
Yes.
You say that a little bit like you wish it hadn't happened or something.
Yes. Well, something needed to be done. Well, you just did it.
Okay. All right. Talk about the changes that you have seen over your career in technology in the practice of law.
Tremendous changes. When I came to the bar, the research was done. It was all through the books. One of the set of books was West's Tennessee Digest, and you could look up things there. And then there were ways of going from one case to another and things like that.
Shepherdizing cases?
Shepherdizing it. But then the computer age came along, and it just changed things. So the research was so much easier and so much more accurate. I'm going to change just a little bit on here. When I went to the Bell firm, their copy machine was a wet kind of copy machine thing. It was very, just tough to do. And finally, we got a regular copy machine, which of course speeded up work. Bell firm was a little bit ahead of the Noon firm in that the typewriters were IBM Ball typewriters, which could be done. And then that morphed into IBM coming up with the MagCard system into the typewriters.
And what is a MagCard system?
Well, it was a card like this. It would slip down in there, and you could type and change. But if you made a mistake, you could go back and change it. And our productivity at the Bell firm increased almost by 30% with that when we got those new mag cards, because otherwise a secretary would be coming down and she would get slower and slower and slower, not wanting to make a mistake and having to start all over again, or erasing, something like that. So that was a big thing.
And what did Mr. Bell say about those machines?
Well, he went along with them.
Didn't he say something about the sound of the secretary's typing? Do you remember what he said about that?
I know you remember it, but I don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I don't remember.
Wasn't it something about that change to him was the sound of money or something?
That sounds like Mr. Bell.
Okay. Anyway, what other changes have you seen in technology?
Well, I remember when we got a big machine for a printer. It was big like that, and it would print a whole page in a minute, and that was, I mean, that was fantastic. And then, of course, we've got the other type of printers now.
Okay. When computers came into use in the office,
Well,
how was that transition made?
Well, Eddie Hedrick. Eddie Hedrick was the one that brought us into that. He was. He said, "Well, he'd just buy his own computer, And it turned out that it was so successful and everything, why we ended up getting computers for all the secretaries.
Okay, but what about the lawyers? How did they react to having computers?
You mean about having to use them or something?
Or whether they would or wouldn't use them?
They wouldn't use them, and I don't know whether any of them would use them today or not. No, I mean, we had Jack Whitson, he wouldn't have done it. Harlan Painter wouldn't have done it.
What about Mike Calloway?
No, probably not.
And what about you? How did you deal with computers?
Well, when I started writing some of those articles and things, I'd like to use the computer, but I'd be in the house working on something like that, and I'd hit a wrong button, and something would disappear, and certain exclamations were made, and my dear wife, say, "Honey, I thought computers were supposed to make things easier." So, sticking the knife in.
Okay. What about the use of email?
Oh boy, I was behind on that too.
Well,
I use it now regularly.
Okay, but compared to the other lawyers of your generation that you practice with, how did they use it?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so.
I think my recollection is you've always been pretty willing to embrace the changes in technology.
Yeah, because it just made when you did it right, it made life a whole lot easier, and especially in legal research, I think is where we had Westlaw on the internet stuff, and shepherdizing cases and following up on cases, just putting in the right words and all that sort of stuff, just made all the difference in the world.
Okay. What changes have you seen?
Excuse me. And also in drafting the wills, things like that, it speeded it up so much, and then again the ability to go back and make corrections.
And what did you do in your practice to facilitate the drafting of wills?
I would some basic forms that we would use, and then adapt them as necessary to the particular client that we might be dealing with. But there are certain things that would be in most wills.
Okay, all right. What changes have you seen in the law over the years?
Well, this may not be answering on your question, but one of the bad things I thought was lawyer advertising. I think when the Supreme Court made that decision, it damaged the congeniality. It damaged the. I think, as far as I'm concerned, maybe the standing of a lawyer about advertising. But of course, a lot of good lawyers do advertise, and apparently it pays off for them. You know that our firm never advertised. We didn't even have black type in advertising on our telephone directory. We depended on referrals from clients primarily, is what we did our practice on.
Okay. And have you noticed any changes in lawyers over the course of your practice?
I'm not sure quite what you're driving.
Well, in terms of attitudes or relationships, or...
Well, it's not as congenial as it used to be.
Do you have any idea about why you think it might be like that?
Well, I think it's competition. I think maybe trying to get clients, and then some people are just more antagonistic than others. That's all there is to it.
Okay. What have you noticed the effect of women in the profession has been?
A great deal of improvement.
Of course, your daughter's sitting here asking you this question.
No, I'm serious about that, because I don't know that our judges in Cleveland would ever refer to him as honey or something like that at the beginning. But it did occur other places, and finally, they just brought it to attention, they're not going to put up with that stuff. And I think women lawyers are as respected now, a good woman lawyer is as respected now as any good male lawyer.
Okay. In fact, in Cleveland, did you really notice, as women started practicing more and more in our community, any particular attitudes towards women as lawyers there, just in Cleveland?
Well,
any negative attitudes, or?
No, I haven't. I didn't notice any negative attitudes toward women. Of course, the very first case you tried, I think, was a rear end case, where your client rear-ended somebody, and you got a defendant's verdict. I think that brought some real respect to your ability.
Were you in? Frankly, I don't really remember that particular case, but were you in the courtroom when I did that?
No, I learned about it after you got back, and I couldn't believe it.
Oh, okay. So, in other words, you thought that maybe my case wasn't winnable?
Well, it was a rear-end collision. Most of those are kind of difficult to win.
Right. Okay.
And it was a jury case.
I don't know if I remember it my first case. I do remember some along those lines, but that's been a while back, I have to say. Let's see. Changes in the estate tax area. This year is unique federal estate tax wise. What do you think about the fact that there is no federal estate tax, but there, of course, are some other taxes this year in 2010?
Well, that's not going to stay that way, I don't think. I think,
Well, it won't. The law will change. Will stay the way it is, which will be a worse estate tax burden than last year. But what do you think, just in general, of not having an estate tax?
I don't approve of that.
And why is that?
I don't think. I think it could go back to the early days of our country, when you had wealth concentrated on such a small amount of people, and the way that the railroad barons and all that sort of stuff, that I don't think was good for the country. And I think that I think there should be a reasonable death tax on giving up, $3.5 to $5 million, something like that. Over that, a reasonable state tax would be good in my mind.
Okay. You have a pin there on your lapel. Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Oh, that's a quink.
Which is what?
50 years graduation from Vanderbilt Law School.
Okay, and so you're wearing the pin for Vanderbilt. Have you had a continuing contact or relationship with Vanderbilt over the years?
Yes. I've made contributions most every year.
Okay, and do you still keep in touch with some of your law school classmates?
Yes.
And what was the year you graduated from Vanderbilt?
54.
1954.
Right.
Okay. Do you have you been involved in any kind of reunions with any of your classmates?
Yes. I'm trying to think the last one I went to. It's in 5-year intervals is what it is, and I don't believe a 5-year interval may have occurred, and I didn't attend, but I did the last time I attended. Unfortunately, we had insufficient number of college of classmates to make up a table, and so they dipped down into the 1949 pool to make up a table.
Yeah.
But Roy Miles, I know in Nashville, is the class man to look onto these things. I did that for a number of years, but
Organizing the reunions,
yes,
that sort of thing?
yes.
How many people were in your law school class?
55.
Okay, very good. See, we've talked some about your family, your wife and your children. You have grandchildren?
Yes, 5 living, 1 deceased.
Okay, and are any of them lawyers or likely to be lawyers?
No.
Okay. Now you have some new great-grandchildren?
3.
All right. Wonder if any of them will be lawyers.
I don't know. You're going to have to work on it.
Okay. Let's talk. Let me make sure about my questions here. I've talked a little bit and asking you questions about your career and when you were practicing. And I mentioned in the introduction that you are now retired. Tell us when you retired from the practice of law.
December 31st, 2009.
Okay.
No, excuse me.
2009.
2000.
Last December.
Yeah,
right?
last December.
End of last year. Okay. And at that time, how long had you been practicing law?
55 years and 5 months.
All right. And how did you kind of work your way into retirement?
Well, I just began to feel that I wasn't being as good a lawyer as I wanted to be. I know people stay on too long, and I did not want to do that. And so I started cutting back and just made it final on December the 31st, 2009.
Okay. What was your process of cutting back?
Putting things on you.
What did you? How did you have a plan in terms of clients and how you were going to reduce your caseload and your hours, all that?
I can't say it was just a plan that I'd laid out or anything, but sometimes when people would call, I just refer them to somebody else, maybe even another lawyer if it was not something I wanted to handle. It's just, and then I just eased into it.
Okay. And actually, before your retirement, you moved from Cleveland, where you were still practicing.
That's right.
Okay, to where?
Signal Mountain, Tennessee.
All right. And how long a drive is it from Signal Mountain to Cleveland?
Well, round trip is about 80 miles, and that helped because I was always really tired when I got back home.
You mean that helped you decide to retire?
It helped me decide to retire. Yes.
Okay. And how long have you lived on Signal Mountain now?
We moved up there in 2002, I believe.
Okay, and that's where you had lived before, I believe.
Yeah, we lived up there from 56 to 64.
That was the time when you were practicing in Chattanooga?
Yeah, and 64 is when we moved to Cleveland.
Okay, so you lived in Cleveland for about 38, 39 years?
Yeah, when we moved up there, we had been in, when we moved back, we'd been gone 38 years.
All right. What was it like moving back to a place where you had lived before but hadn't lived for 30-something years?
Well, it was nice. We managed to get together with some of our friends that we had before and do things with them. Made a lot of new friends. Alexian Village is a very, very friendly place. Everybody speaks. Nobody remembers anybody else's name.
And Alexian Village is what? Tell us what Alexian Village is.
Well, it's a retirement community. They have there's an inn, what they call an inn, which is for some people that maybe need more help than others, and then there's
like assisted living or
assisted
something?
living, something like that, and also the brothers of the Alexian, whatever.
An order of the Catholic Church?
Yes, that's where they reside also. And by the way, interestingly, the international headquarters of the Alexian thing is right there on Signal Mountain.
But you said it's a retirement community, so do you all live in an apartment or something like that?
Yes, we live in an apartment.
Okay. And so since your retirement, what have you been doing to stay occupied?
Well, I do a lot of reading. I like to try to play tennis about twice a week. I'm chairman of the Signal Mountain Investment Club, which specializes in buying losing stocks.
Tough time for the market, isn't it?
It sure is.
Okay.
And church work.
Okay. Tell us about your tennis. Who you play? Do you have a group you play tennis with, or what?
Yes, it's a group of anywhere from 4 to 6. CPA up there has a tennis court and behind his house, and if we have 4 playing, that's fine. If we have 6 playing, we can rotate it out okay. If we have 5 playing, we rotate it out okay. And then in addition to that, there's a new fellow that has moved up to the village that he and I have been playing singles regularly.
And you've played tennis for many years, haven't you?
I played at it for many years, yes.
Well, I happened to speak with Al Secor the other day, and he had an interesting phrase. He said that you are the king of dink shots. What does that mean?
Well, it's kind of a slice shot that doesn't go very far over the net.
So did you and Al play tennis together some?
Yeah, we did. We did.
Okay. You mentioned a minute ago that you were spending a lot of time reading. What types of things do you read?
It's general things. There's nothing really very, very heavy. Clive Cussler or something like that. I've just finished reading 2 books by Wilbur Smith, which is about ancient Egypt. It's fiction, but very, very interesting. And sometimes I read World War II books. I found some good authors on World War II, and they've been novels, but they have been very, very accurate novels.
If I remember correctly, besides the other things you mentioned you do, there's a group that gets together that calls itself a think tank.
A think tank, yeah.
What does the think tank do generally?
Well, they discuss certain subjects which I don't necessarily want to bring up, not because of any. Because of dealing with the president, I don't want to discuss it.
Do they talk about like national, world affairs, politics,
Oh yeah,
that sort of thing?
yeah. Well, the economy, the problems with the economy. That's a big discussion thing.
Okay. Are there any other lawyers or in the group?
Yes, Mickey Barker's part of it. He doesn't come very regularly. Recently, he's stayed away a while. Well, Ted Milburn, the retired judge, he's in it. He's the one that actually got me in it. And I'm trying to think of somebody. Rick John, J-H-N, Chattanooga lawyer is in it. And interestingly, when I came to Chattanooga because his father had been at the Noon firm and he moved off someplace else.
Oh, okay. Now, what this think tank, have you all solved any problems yet?
No. Oh yeah, we've got a lot of solutions, but nobody will pay attention to it.
Okay. Okay. Before we finish, is there anything else that you would like to tell us about that we haven't asked?
Well, I really, really enjoyed the practice of law. The clients I dealt with, getting to know their problems and trying to help them out, that's been rewarding. The other lawyers I have been associated with, I've been blessed, absolutely blessed with having been associated with just really excellent lawyers. And that has meant a lot to me that way. And I think, you know, I think most lawyers are basically honest and they're trying to do a good job. You get a few rotten apples, but you do that in every profession. So it's just been a very satisfying career.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to do the interview.
Okay, thank you.